Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the episode here on the Amazing Podcast. And we want to bring you the latest and the greatest in the space of cloud native Kubernetes. And today we're going to be touching on security. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Amazing. And I want to encourage you, if you like what you hear on this episode, go and check out all of our other episodes as well. We've been doing a lot of talks over the past couple of years with many leaders and innovators uh, in the space, both from open source and commercial products. And they really, on the show, they really bring what they're doing, what they're building, they really bring it in a very consumable, crisp, easy to digest format. That's a great introduction to any of their products and tools. So go and check out amazic.com to get all of it. That's amazic.com. I have with me today Nicholas Erman. He is the product marketing manager at Wiz. That's WIZ, Wiz. And if you've been in the cloud native Kubernetes space, you probably have heard of them. Quite a popular name, and they built a really cool, I think, expansive, a wide-ranging platform for cloud native security. And we want to touch on that today, particularly what they're doing related to Kubernetes security and container security. So that's the plan for today. Let's get started. Nick, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Twain. Thank you for having me in your amazing video podcast.
All right. So, yeah, I was wondering if you could get us started with an introduction about yourself, what you've been up to before Wiz, and just how you got to Wiz.
Yeah, so, oh man, that's so many years that I'm in that business. So I started more than 20 years ago, and I was really focused on, helping customer to build their infrastructure. So that was my main focus back in the days. And then after many years of building many different infrastructure for those customers from on-prem to the cloud, I decided to say, okay, now I want to be closer to the project, and I wanted to you know like uh, help them to design, not building, but designing their projects. So I move a little bit on the pre-sale side, and then I used to work for a company like Red Hat, or the last one being HashiCorp.
Mhm.
And since then, I also wanted to, okay, now because I spend a lot of time on this, I said now it's time also to get in closer to the product, and that's where I moved to Wiz. So that's funny because my background was more like infra, cloud, DevOps, and of course, always related to security because you always have to think about it when you're building infrastructure. And
Mm.
now I'm on the cybersecurity side since 2 years at Wiz.
All right, awesome. Yeah, that's quite a bit of experience there, and quite looking forward to hearing from you. I want to get us started with asking you kind of an opener question about just when it comes to Kubernetes and container security. What is the pulse that you sense happening today? What is Wiz focused on? And kind of frame today's discussion for us.
Okay, so very interesting question. So Kubernetes is and the ecosystem, all the containerized application are used, I would say, like a huge part of the new, I would say, digital transformation of all the companies today. So the thing is, when you look at it, it seems like it's kind of simple to build that application, but all the infrastructure, all the ecosystem around it is very complex, I would say. So when I talk to Kubernetes, when I talk to containerized application, the thing that I will divide that in three pillars, I would say. The first one is being, how do I secure the code itself that I would like to run on my containerized application? So the main thing is here, like everything related to open source libraries that I'm using, because of course, as a developer, what I do is like I go to the internet and I'm looking at what's the latest and coolest libraries that I could use to build my application, because I'm not I'm not going to write it myself. I'm going to use piece that I'm going to stitch together to build my own application. So that will be the first thing, is looking at, okay, how do I know what I'm using? And from a security aspect is also, how do I, have that information and look at all the new technologies that I need to take care of from a security perspective. The second one is, okay, now I look at the code. So now it will be more about the building and deploying that application to somewhere. And that's where we look at, all the pipeline and all the deployment aspect of it, and how everything is automated, but also how to make sure that we have some guardrails here in that sense, on the fact that we don't want to deploy things that will create like issues on the production environment. And finally, two aspect I would say is like Kubernetes. It's easy to deploy if you from a cloud standpoint. You can do few clicks. You have a completely Kubernetes running Kubernetes cluster, I would say in few minutes. But the thing is, again, it's kind of complex, and the fact that cloud makes things so easy doesn't mean that it's always secure, and that's what you have to keep in mind, right? And so having that visibility and understanding how it is configured and being able to see that without always bothering the developers, I would say is quite important. So that's the one of the last aspect. And the last one is, of course, protecting at runtime. That means the fact that, okay, I prevent everything. I try to do my best to make sure that everything is secure in my environment. But what else if something happened? So I still need to look at what is running. And that's where you start to think about, not so new technology, but that's where you see now it's like eBPF, the fact that you can, like have kind of observability, I would say, of what is running and how it's reacting in the systems.
Mm-hmm. Wow, excellent. And yeah, those you really described really the goals of security when it comes to Kubernetes and containers. That was really helpful. But I want to ask about those being the goals, what are the key challenges that organizations face when they set out to meet these goals specifically? What are the roadblocks along the way? You mentioned cloud can make things easy, but I'm sure there's different new kind of challenges that come up when it comes to Kubernetes and container security. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So again, the cloud makes things easy, but that also makes things harder from a security perspective, or even from the challenges that you could have as an organization. The thing is, using the cloud, you can go very easily in there and start to build things, but without any control, I would say. And one of the key challenges is, I would say, shadow IT. You don't even know what is happening because people are just using it, and they are building things. And when they build things, they are probably using like, automation that are coming from internet. So they don't really always understand what they're doing because they just say it works. So let's just do that. So that one of the first challenge. That's why also you've seen like since like a couple of years now, like the CSPM aspect. It's like looking at being able to connect to the cloud and look at those misconfiguration. So that's one of the first challenge, I would say. And another one would be like, of course, it's so easy to now play with identity and and do things do I would say like doing something wrong in that space. It's so easy as a challenge in there to like create overprivileged account because that's already what you did on prem most of the time. We all remember that everybody like in the early 2000 were all admin, even if it was just users of the environment. So thinking about the way that the cloud is easy but different from what you had on prem can create, it's kind of the challenge because that means you have to change all the processes. You have to change the way you were dealing with the security. You have to change the way you were reacting to things. And that's where I would say one of the biggest challenge from that is, yes, I can't use the exact same processes and operating model that I have on-prem and transpose it to the cloud. So that's I would say from a challenging. And another one is, of course, the cloud does not react exactly the same, and it's not exactly also the same infrastructure as you had on-prem. So another challenge is, should I use the same application and in the same way, like a big monolith or a VMs that I just do lift and shift in the cloud? So that could make things easy, but it's not the way you should use the cloud. So that's also another challenge. Sometimes re-architecting the application. That's where you have like containers and Kubernetes, of course.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really interesting. Um, I was wanting to ask, so what is the approach that Wiz takes when it comes to, uh, solving for cloud security, especially considering that it's new and it's different from on-premise? What are kind of the few, you'd say, principles that Wiz has when it comes to solving for container and Kubernetes security?
Yes, again, very interesting question. So I think what is really important when you are dealing with cloud is to be born in the cloud and to understand the cloud, how it works, and also using the same, I would say, principle from a cloud perspective. So you have to build something that is cloud native, that it born and built for the cloud itself. So from that perspective, using API is obviously probably the most important thing, and saying that it has to be integrated like completely seamlessly with the cloud itself, how it runs and so on. So from that perspective, using API is, of course, I would say one of the biggest one, and also using the capabilities of the cloud. So when we started with, we decided to go as an agentless, scanning company. Okay, and what does it mean? It's really simple. It's just, okay, the cloud is providing all the API. The cloud is using specific architecture that we can reuse and make sure that we can connect, in those environment and give a complete visibility, because that's what happened also with what I said earlier. It's like shadow IT means you don't even know. Okay. But if you can, access, I would say, to the organization account, and you can connect to it, and then you can scan everything, you can detect pretty much everything. So that's the first thing, giving that visibility. But the other thing is, the cloud is so complex that having the context and understand exactly what is happening and how it's happening. Like, for instance, you can go back to the on-prem days and look at the vulnerability management, for instance. You were having tons of vulnerability that you had to manage. And that was okay, because you really know and you really known and understood your environment. So that was okay to look at the vulnerability from that perspective. But in the cloud, it's completely different. Having that vulnerability doesn't mean a lot. It means, because you don't know really the full context of the cloud itself. Is it important? Should I prioritize that one? And that's also something that is, I would say, very important. So understand the context and use specific technologies to understand that context and give that visibility and that information. I would say it's very important.
Mhm. Wow, that's a really interesting response, and I was hoping you could demo some of that in a few minutes. Um, yeah, just to recap though, some of the things you mentioned is having agentless API-based scanning for
Hmm.
security.
Yes.
A very key concept that you mentioned there. And also, I think one more thing that stood out in your response was context, the importance of context, because the cloud is um, different from on-premise, and it's more complex, and there are different nuances at work, and so you need context to make decisions, to identify threats accurately. It's a lot of good stuff there, and we'll unpack a bit. We'll unpack that some more. I was wondering if you could give us a little demo now of, um, demonstrating some of these things you spoke about, of how Wiz uh, approaches security for containers, and show us uh, how, yeah, some of the key aspects of it from the Wiz product itself.
Yes, of course. Let me let me start. So how does it works? That's the dashboard. So again, that's very simple. The thing that we want to achieve with Wiz is to make sure that we make things easy and understandable from a security aspect for a security team, but also for any other people that needs to connect to Wiz to manage their own environment. Because we really think that, the security is like a team sport. So it's like the cloud itself. Everybody can use the cloud. It's not like IT ops managing the full infrastructure. So that's pretty much the same way we built, like, um, I would say the Wiz platform. It's like making sure that we are ingesting tons of information, but we are, giving that information in an actionable way for users when they are connecting to Wiz. So again, the first thing that you do when you deploy Wiz, like you're connect to the API, and like in less than 20 minutes, you're going to have a complete inventory of everything that is running in your environment, including, of course, Kubernetes clusters and so on and so forth. And the second part is using the snapshot scanning, so the agentless scanning, to look at uh, to do a deep scanning of all the workload also that are in your environment. So that could be VM, that could be container, that could be serverless, that could be all those things that are running in your environment. And then out of that, that's where we build and we prioritize the issues based on what we call a toxic combination. And looking a little bit further on that, let's use a specific dashboard that is about container security here. So we are doing that for everything, of course, in any view that we have in the Wiz platform, but doing today a focus on the container security. What I would like to see is all the things related to my environment. So here, from a Kubernetes or container security perspective, what I see here is like all the container security issues by severity. So again, what is important, I would say, based on the context, is which critical issues do I have in my environment? What is the most uh, you know um, critical and potential issue that will create a breach in that could create a breach if I didn't do anything in my environment? So here it's really looking at from a prevention perspective, looking at the risk that I have in my environment. So looking at that, I can see here that I have the top container issues. I can see also what is exposed, what is not exposed, all the compliance score that I also have in regard of the CIS benchmark and all those compliance. And then I also have, from that perspective, a complete inventory of clusters and so on. From a security perspective, that just helped me to understand, okay, that's my big picture of everything that is running in the different cloud environment. And then also from a developers or DevOps perspective, I can also see my specific Kubernetes cluster. That's something that I will see after. But from that perspective, what I would like to see is, okay, which one is the most critical vulnerability that I have in my environment, for instance? So let's use that one, for instance. Here I see that I have a publicly exposed container with high privileges that is also using an image with high critical severity vulnerabilities with a known exploit. From that perspective, again, what I would like to understand is, okay, why that one is critical? It's not only just looking at, okay, I have a vulnerability with like a critical score, CVSS score. That's something, but that's not the most important things I would say that I need to look at or that I would like to understand in my environment. So looking at the overview and looking a little bit further on the attack path visualization, that's where you see the power of the graph. We are, you know, um, calculating all the different potential attack paths, or issues that you have in your environment, and we are combining them together to make sure that that's the critical attack path that we have detected in that specific environment. So looking from that one, you see that we have a container. That container is exposed. How do we detect that? Again, completely without any agent. We just look at the configuration, but we also calculate, based on the graph, the effectiveness of what we discovered. It's not like just looking from a CSPM perspective. Okay, I see the configuration, and I from that configuration, I said that one is public or that one is not public because we don't really know the context, right? Here, what we do is like we see everything and we effectively calculate the exposure, and we also go look from the outside in from a dynamic scanner perspective. And here we see that that specific container is really exposed because we tested it from the outside, right? So we know the full access. So that's, I would say, a first vector of attack, potential attack that I have in my environment. But combined with the vulnerabilities that I'm using in my container, because those vulnerabilities are in that specific container image, I can understand now that I have those specific vulnerability. Let me click on it. And then I see, okay, that's the vulnerability that I have in that specific container image. I know exactly which one is the most critical. I know from which vulnerability, I mean, from which layer I introduce that vulnerability. So for now, I know that it's from the base image. So I go very deep on the information because also as a developer, I would like to know and I would like to understand what should I do? Where should I remediate that specific vulnerability, for instance? So then going back to the overview, I can also see again all the layers. I can even have the information here on when the image was created and if it was used by any other things in my environment, because I see that that containers is using that specific images.
Mhm.
Then looking at that, I also see that I have a specific IAM role associated to that specific container. And that specific IAM role has a high privileges and can go and can have a high bindings that can give a lot of access. So all those different attack vectors combining together makes the attack path, makes the toxic combination. That's what I said. Looking from a context perspective and understanding that context makes things way easier for detecting the real issues and also to prioritize them in the environment.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow.
And yes, you had question maybe.
Yeah, no, just a comment that, there's just a wealth of information that I can see here. So many numbers, all of them organized really well across the dashboard. And then I love this visualization that shows not just which part of the system is exposed, but even how it connects to the rest of the system and the different layers of the exposure. It's not just one thing. There's IAM roles and then the container itself and different things that are connected and showing how there are different risks at different parts
Mhm.
of the single exposure. So really cool how all of the security information, which is actually so dense, is really organized very well and is easy to actually browse through and look at what's wrong and make a decision. So kudos to you and the team for really designing this so well despite so much of information over there.
Yes, that's really the goal, I would say. It's like making things consumable for non-security expert and also for non-Kubernetes expert to understand, or non-container expert to understand, okay, that's the context, that's where it stands, that's the environment. So I don't have to understand all the things that are in there. Like I don't even know what is an ECS container, but I really understand that, okay, that container is still running exposed and has high privileges and use that specific image. So I know all the component in that specific one.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Then
Um,
yes.
yeah, carry on. You're
Yes,
gonna say.
based on that, of course, you have all the information on the resources, you see all the vulnerability risk, the external exposure risk, and so on and so forth. But what is important is, okay, what do I do now? So from that perspective, I have many different things that I can do, but the first one will be probably like, I want to generate a ticket. I want to create and, alert the teams in charge of that specific environment. So I will create a ticket, could be on Jira, could be on Slack, or could be on any other ticketing systems, could be ServiceNow. It's really important also to be able to integrate with the ecosystem used by the organization, because you have many different teams, they have many different processes and workflow they're using. So being able to connect to each of them and just making sure that they all use the same tool they're used to use, that's very important. And then based on that is just looking at the remediation step, and could be from different aspects. Maybe the first one is, okay, that one shouldn't be exposed, but because I don't have access to the images, or it's another process to patch that images, maybe the first things to do is, okay, I just like limit the exposure. So that's the first thing I'm gonna do. And also I will follow those different remediation steps, or I could even use like the Ask AI capabilities to look at, okay, that's what I should do from a Terraform perspective, or the AWS console, or the CLI. And we are doing the exact same thing for any other cloud, because it's you know, like completely holistic platform.
Oh, really cool. You've integrated AI here. And I want to just touch on one more thing you mentioned earlier, which is having guardrails in place, which is kind of like proactive and setting things, checks in place that, stuff doesn't break in production. Could you kind of show us an example of that? Maybe a security policy, how it's
Yes.
where it is.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're doing with all the secure development parts. So, of course, from a runtime perspective, you are looking at what is running. So you can understand the way it works. You can define the standard based on that, right? Because you know how your environment are running. But then as soon as you're building that, what is important is, okay, now is how can I move all my standard policy and make sure that all the check are happening early in the process. So that's exactly where and that's what you're seeing here. You can create like policies to be at a different layer, looking at misconfiguration, vulnerabilities, and so on, and doing those check directly in the IDE or in the pipeline itself, or even, and now that's something that we released a few months ago. It's like connecting to the VCS repo and scanning the content of those repo, looking at, vulnerabilities and so on. And the last piece is, of course, looking at, for instance, what is happening from a deployment perspective, looking at the admission policies. So being able to use an admission controller and looking at misconfiguration and image trust, for instance. So creating a policy is very simple. You just create a policy, you define where you want to use it, if it's at build time or deploy time. Let's say deploy, you say a policy type, a cloud misconfiguration, it's like demo. And here you define that it's very important, the scope. Is it for every environment, or is it specifically, for instance, those Kubernetes production cluster, and not for all of them? You see what I mean? And then you enforce or not that specific action. You can audit or block. That's also very important, because when you are integrating those new guardrails, it's maybe it's very important to understand how it works and the potential impact, because before blocking anything, because then you can also educate the developers and say, hey, now you see exactly what could happen. So the next step will be blocking that. So use and remediate those stuff before, and just like start to had those specific uh guardrails, I mean, like best practices directly in your development process. And then you define also what are the ignore rules and what you would like to do in your environment, depending on the rules that you are looking at. So here it will be everything related to misconfiguration and so on.
Mm. Mhm. Wow, really cool. I like that. Uh, it's not just like a bunch of YAML script. That's how you define the policy, but it's very simple that anybody can define a policy. They just need to make their selections and options there. I just like how simple it is creating a policy. That's very cool.
And then that's where you see also the report, that where you can be, like, of course you will have all the information from the VCS repo or from your IDE, but you also look at the report of what is happening from a security perspective. That also give you an understanding of, okay, that's the way my developer works in their environment. My developer work in their environment, and that's also probably give me enough information also to adapt or change few things based on the way they are working.
All right, all right. Wow, that's amazing. Thanks so much for the demo. It's really, uh, yeah, really cool what is possible with Wiz and how these complex security tasks are really made very simple in the Wiz dashboard. So yeah, great job with this. As we wind down, Nicholas, I want to kind of get your thoughts on just what you see on, as you look ahead the next 1 year, 2 years, how do you see container security and Kubernetes security changing and evolving? What are some of the top things you're keeping an eye on in the next 1 to 2 years? Or, what is Wiz looking at and what is Wiz building? Um, if you could end on that note, just looking ahead, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Yes, of course. So I would say what we have to understand, and that's already what we have integrated in Wiz since day one when we were looking at Kubernetes, is Kubernetes is like a cloud, like any other cloud. It's like a component. I mean, it has to be, secure in the same way. So you have to look at the Kubernetes cluster in the environment where it's running. So the Kubernetes cluster is the cloud, but it's the cloud running on top of another cloud, because that's what you see most of the time. It's like using Kubernetes as a managed services on AWS or Azure and so on. So having, and the full context and understanding that the interaction that you have between the Kubernetes cluster itself, the containers, but also the cloud infrastructure where it's running on, I would say it's very important. It shouldn't be like seen as only one platform, if you see what I mean. It's a platform running somewhere. And that's what I see most of the time from a container security perspective. It's like we are mainly looking at the container in the Kubernetes cluster on its own, but not running, not in like in a broader environment. So that's the first thing I would like to say. And then I would say now I would say on the Kubernetes and container security perspective is agentless. I would say it's a combination of both. You need both solution. And you
Mhm.
need to have something that works well together. It's not like I'm building things that it works on one side and I'm trying to cover the other side using another technology. It's like more, I would say, like a fusion of those two approach and making the best and using the best part of those tools. And so in that way, I would say the eBPF and everything that is, on that side is, again, looking at more from an observability perspective, looking at, for now, what we were doing most of the time on container security, that was looking at the vulnerabilities and so on. But now what is very important, I would say, it's, okay, I'm using a lot of microservices, so I have a lot of east-west traffic. So how do I manage that? How do I know which application of which microservices is talking to the other microservices? You can look at that from a configuration perspective, but it's way better to have that observability piece. And I would say um, that's something like people are, I am looking at more and more. It's like understanding the application from an application perspective, and not only from the infrastructure layer, I would say. So all those observability and performance of the application and real time, I would say, flows between the different microservices. And outside of that, of course, again, it's like looking at the complete supply chain. It's something that we see more and more again, and we have again like very recent example of how like a bad actor can even spend like years trying to change the open source code of a very well-known package, to start to build backdoors and so on. I you know what which one I'm talking with what's the one I'm talking about. And so being able to have that, again, that complete comprehension of the full end-to-end software development life cycle, from where do I start with the open source libraries, where do I have it in my code, where it's running, where, and is it running as, or is it like, that's the behavior is as expected and so on. That's also, I would say, like the complete and full story, I would say, on the container security.
Wow. It was a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much, Nicholas, for joining us today and sharing all of that. Really enjoyed this conversation. Before you go, though, there's one question that I just want to ask to get to know you a bit. If you could tell us what would be your alternate career path if not for your job in tech?
Oh, that's a very good question, because I started to think about being in that path since even before a teenager, so like a child. But yeah, if I wouldn't be in tech, I would probably doing something more manual, because I like to create things. So I don't say I'm gonna be an artist, of course, but it's more like, I know, building things, like customized, because I really like motorcycles. So that could be something about like customization of motorcycle for specific customers and so on, based on specific needs. So, and creating an experience around that. So that's probably something that I would have done if I didn't go to the tech.
Really cool. Yeah, I'm interested in motorcycles as well. Which one do you ride, by the way?
I'm riding KTM, so I'm
Yeah.
European, so
Uh,
European motorcycle.
Which one do you have? The
Uh,
690 or
no, the
which
Super Duke
one?
1290. Yes.
Top. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's quite a beast.
Yeah, I like also adrenaline, so it's important.
Wow, very cool. All right, Nicholas. It was fascinating chatting and getting to know you a bit more. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Twain, for having me.
And thanks to all of our listeners and viewers as well for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this conversation where we got a really good idea of what Wiz does and how it solves for cloud security. Do tune in again. We publish these podcast episodes almost every week. So go and go to the Amazing website, follow us on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.